Hey, this is Gal Lawrence of 180 Nutrition, and welcome to today's health sessions. So we have an awesome guest for you today, and his name is Dr. Jeffrey Fannin. Now, he's the founder and executive director for the Center of Cognitive Enhancement and Thought Genius. Now, he is also an international authority and speaker in the field of neuroscience research. So in a nutshell, he's a brain expert and understands the brain, how it operates. So he has extensive experience training the brain essentially for optimal brain performance. And he's been doing this for 17 years. So it's a podcast you're going to have to hang on to your hats to a little bit. And it was the first time we had a brain expert on. Now, in a nutshell, he's been working with people from such as like head traumas, attention deficit disorders, so ADD, ADHD, anxiety disorders, depression, trauma recovery. He's then worked on the other end of the scale for like high performance training, such as personal achievement, personal performance, brain mapping for sports, enhancing leadership skills, and all this is through brain entrainment. And I have to say, this is a podcast that goes in every direction, totally. And it's one I'm definitely going to listen to again just to fully understand everything that was spoken about today. So all I say is just keep an open mind and just absorb it and see how you go. But there's a lot of practical advice in there too. Just to give a bit of background, I first met Dr. Fannin. He actually had a brain mapping consultation with him. I was fortunate enough to be in a Dr. Joe Dispenza workshop now a few months ago. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza is, we actually interviewed him on the podcast a few months ago as well. So I highly recommend you check that out because it's going to be quite a correlation into today's episode. But essentially, we went to basically a meditation boot camp, if you like, for 4.5 days. And they brought a team of scientists in and measured the activity of the brain and the coherence and what was going on within the body. So that was Dr. Fannin's role. So I got to know him then, and then I've had consultations since, and it's just been blowing me away with the information I've sort of learned from it. And now I'm just trying to bring it back in and and apply it to my daily life, right? Because that's what you want to do. You want to try and be the best version of yourself and move forward with that. So if you're ever wondering why we think negative thoughts, why we can be in a state of anxiety half the time, why do we do the things we do even though we don't want to be doing them, and we have bad habits and all sorts and react to situations when we don't necessarily want to, then Dr. Jeff Fannin is going to certainly explain a lot of that today. So strap yourself in and enjoy. All right, let's go to Dr. Jeff Fannin. Hi, this is Guy Lawrence. I'm joined with Stuart Cook as always. Hi, Stuart.
Hello, mate.
And our fantastic guest today is Dr. Jeffrey Fannin. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's greatly appreciated. Now, you're actually our first brain specialist, so I think you need to go easy on us a little bit today, okay?
I'll try and do that, yeah.
And it does get me thinking, if you sat in an aeroplane next to a complete stranger and they asked you what you did for a living, how would you answer that?
Well, that happens to me more frequently than you think. That, we might be at a dinner party or on an airplane or something like that, and it always gets around to, what do you do? And I used to answer that in a variety of ways, and I've tried to simplify it. So now I explain to people I'm a neuroscientist. And then they get this deer in the headlights look, just like, oh my God, this guy's reading my brain, and so then they want to know more about that. And so we ensue in that conversation. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, we measure brainwave activity, and we do that through brain mapping. So we do an EEG, electroencephalogram, and then we will convert that into a quantitative EEG, which means that we look at all these little heads, and the colors on there tells us what's going on in the brain. And so with these consults that I do every day for people all around the world that have been to like one of Dr. Joe Dispenza's events, and we do brain mapping on them, and then I can do an interpretation. So we use a GoToMeeting, kind of like what we're doing on Skype here. I bring up their brain map and I can show them, here's what's working for you, here's what's not working for you. We even have a lot of signatures from people who are highly intuitive, and I'll show them that signature and ask them the question, do you think that you're intuitive? And the stories I get after that are just amazing.
Just
Like,
open up.
well, yeah, it comes out in this way and that way, and so I'll
Yeah.
show them the pattern of here's the part that is what we call clairsentient, or you know things about people, but you don't know how you know it. And then I'll show them the signature on the other side of the brain of this is when people are able to interpret other people's emotional states. And you can do that quite readily. And then they'll have
Wow.
a lot of stories about that. Everybody has that ability. You know, the question is, do people tend to cultivate that? And so with these meditators that we work with all around the world, the one thing that I'm finding that's really fascinating to me is when we look at their brain map, that there are these markers. There's about 12 markers, and we see a great deal of consistency. So over the last 3 years that we've measured them at these events, probably close to 3,000 people, and talking with them, we see the same kinds of signatures. Some are more defined than others, but these people have the same markers, and those markers really are the starting point where the magic begins to happen for a lot of these people. We measure people who have actually interdimensional experiences. They have beings that visit them during these events. I mean, we have a lot of people who have been able to do healing. We've got a lot of stories in Dr. Joe's book, You Are the Placebo, Making Your Mind Matter, and a bunch of brain cases in there where people have gotten rid of brain tumors, people who have lessened the effects of Parkinson's disease or Hashimoto's disease. And so over the years, we hear a lot of that going on. Pardon me, I'll turn
That's
that
all right.
off.
So to pull it back a bit from that, just to get a bit of background on you and
Uh-huh.
what you do. So I know you've been doing this a long time, right? So I think it's like
Yeah,
17 years.
over 17 years. Uh-huh.
And we're always interested to find out a little bit about the journey because I knew you used to be a pilot. Is that correct?
That's true. Yeah, in fact, my keen ambition for a long time was to be an astronaut. And
Wow.
at one time, I had an appointment to the U.S. Air Force Academy. My cousin was a former governor and senator of Arizona, where I lived. I didn't live in Arizona at that time, but my grades were good enough to capture an appointment to the Air Force Academy. And then, the Vietnam War was pretty heavy during that time. I didn't know if I really wanted to be in the military. I wanted to be an astronaut. That was pretty clear from the time I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I wrote letters to the Mercury astronauts back then, and they actually sent me letters back. Their secretaries probably signed them, but I cherished them and had a little scrapbook with their pictures and followed all the Mercury stuff. And but when it got to the point of having to decide whether I was going to go into the Air Force Academy, I didn't know if I really wanted to have a career in the military. So I ended up, they had a banquet where we got a chance to talk to a lot of the cadets and whatnot there. And, they explained what goes on. And so I kind of got some bad advice from my father. And, he was on a submarine during World War II and he wanted me to go in the Navy. And, I didn't really want to be in the service at all, but kind of decided that I was going to opt out of going to the academy.
Yeah.
So then I kind of went the long way around and became a pilot and used to fly tours of Grand Canyon, Lake Powell, Monument Valley, fire attack for the Forest Service, doing all of that, and then got myself to the airlines from that job and was with US Air, and flying the tours and stuff like that. So then I kind of came around to getting a career in the airlines and got on with US Air and stayed there for a few years. And I was based in Los Angeles at LAX, living in Phoenix. And, so some people commute an hour to work in their car. I would go to the airport, get up in the cockpit and the jump seat and, commute an hour to work that way. And
Wow.
So when they started having layoffs in the early 90s, and my seniority number was like in the middle of the stack. So the first layoff, that dropped me to the bottom of the stack, and that was no fun because then I'd have to almost every day go over to LAX and sit in the pilot lounge, for several days in case they needed another crew, and then you'd have to go out, and it's just kind of scuzzy that way.
Yeah.
And then they had another layoff, and that dropped me out of the system. At that point, I knew it'd be at least 2 or 3 years with the way the airline industry was going there in the 90s before I could get back in. And at that time, I decided, I really want to follow more of this brain activity. So a lot of guys that I would fly with, they said, I love flying with you because it's like going to a Tony Robbins seminar in the cockpit, because we talked about all this stuff
Yeah.
that I was so passionate about and learning. And so that's when I went back and got my Ph.D. in psychology.
Got it.
And then decided to go down this track and learned about brain mapping. And after I got my PhD and started working with people and doing counseling, and I decided, there's a lot of these people, they don't really want to get well, so I'm going to work with, high performance with golfers, professional athletes, people like that, and that was good. And they're a real quirky bunch, they want to do it, but they don't want anybody to know they're doing it,
Right.
And so,
like it's a secret weapon or something.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly the way, if I've got an edge, I don't want you to know that I've got an edge, which is really kind of a interesting point of view. Anyway, from there, I learned more about brain mapping, and that really flipped my switch because the more I learned about it, the more I found out that there was to know, and went down that road, and then eventually met up with Dr. Dispenza, and we, when we first got together, it's really kind of a funny story of how we did get together. That I was speaking at an event of another friend of mine, Greg Reed, that does Secret Knock, and he would bring me in periodically, still does, to do what I call brain magic from the stage. So we would put somebody's brain live up on a big screen, and I would show how they change subconscious belief patterns instantly, and be able to show a whole bunch of different things. So we'd always have fun with that. And while I was doing one of these afterwards, Doug caught my attention. He said, "Hey, come here. I need to talk to you." So we started talking about, the brain and what it does. And, somehow we got on the subject of, people that I wanted to meet. And I said, I have two people on the top of my list. One is Greg Braden, and the other is Dr. Joe Dispenza. I really want to meet these guys. And he says, "Well, I do work with Dr. Joe." He says, maybe we could get together on a Skype call or something. And, that sounded a lot to me like, have your people call my people and we'll do lunch, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but it actually happened. So we got together and talked, and Joe invited me up to the Seattle area. He was having a training with a bunch of his instructors. And so we started doing brain maps on all of them. And I'm sitting there telling him all about these things that I could see on the screen. And then later that night when we're having dinner, he said, I've been looking for somebody like you for 3 years. But I left out a piece of the story that's really quite amusing here. That at the time I was actually reading Dr. Joe's book, that Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself,
Yeah.
and just mesmerized by the book. And I had given Doug some of the papers that we had published, from work that we had done at West Point, which is another amusing thing. That here I would have gone to the Air Force Academy and done that, and then I end up roundabout getting involved with the research team of Arizona State University and going to West Point and teaching them how to use their brains. So
Wow, that's quite a journey.
Yeah. So anyway, back to this story. So Dr. Joe went to Doug, and he was reading some of these papers that we published. He says, "I don't care what you have to do. Get me an appointment with this guy." And I was doing the same thing. I went to Doug and I said, "Doug, you got to get me an appointment with him. This book is fascinating." So here we were both trying to connect. Then we connected, and I went up to Seattle, and from there he was getting ready to do one of his advanced meditative events here in Arizona. So we hooked up with that. We didn't even know whether we could measure anything. We just thought, hey, let's give it a try. So we did, and we found we measured something. And then the next event, we did another one. We found more and more and more. And so this thing has evolved to the point where, it's not uncommon for us to have 650 people in the room and us brain mapping about 350 of those people during a 5-day event.
Wow.
So, yeah.
It is, so you've spoken about the brain mapping and all of the analysis and the reporting that you would undergo while you're doing that. Is that neurofeedback? Is that how you term?
No, that's very different. The brain mapping, you're just measuring what's going on in the brain under different conditions. Yes. Neurofeedback is when we are training the brain. So let's suppose that we see a very high elevation at some point in the brain. Let's say it's in the back of the brain. We see a lot of beta. That's usually a pattern that's consistent with anxiety.
Right.
So if we want to reduce that anxiety, we will set up a protocol to train the brain. So we put the electrodes on the head, and now with a lot of stuff we do, we put the cap on the head like we're doing the brain mapping, but we're doing the brain training where we can train 5,700 variables all at once. So you have to kind of understand one of the basic elements of the brain. When we have our thinking cortex, the thinking part of our brain, it processes information at 40 bits per second. Mm-hmm. When you look at the subcortex, the subcortical region of the brain, it can process 40 million bits per second.
So when you say subcortex, is that like the subconsciousness?
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You can think of it that way. So it can process a lot of information that we are not aware of. So when we're training the brain, let's imagine that my finger here is like a thermometer of information going up and down. Yeah. And we have all of that high beta in the back of the brain that is consistent with the anxiety. So we would then put a threshold on that. So that would be where that tops out, kind of like right there.
Yes.
And then if we want the brain to produce more of whatever it is, every time it goes above the threshold, we'll give it a reward. Every time it stays, if we want it to produce less, every time it stays below that, then we'll give it a reward. So question is, what is the reward?
Yes.
It's we can give it sound, ding, 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 kind of thing. So there's a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, and that's how we learn everything. If this, then this. And so that's how we learn. Night follows day. So our brain is very simplistic in that process. So when the brain is producing these frequencies and we give it this reward, ding, 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 every time it stays below the threshold, the brain goes, oh, okay, I'm going to do that. So it does it over and over and over and over again. That's called operant conditioning. And what that does in the brain is it causes new dendrites to form and new neural pathways develop. That's what is rewiring the brain. So it's the same thing as when you create a habit.
Yes.
They say it takes 21 days to create a habit.
Yeah.
It takes 21 days for those neural pathways to entropy or to stop working.
So so nowadays we're living in a society where we got signals coming from everywhere. We've got internet and mobile phone and constant chatter in our brains. And a lot of us are becoming more anxious. And you've probably heard the term monkey mind. This endlessly chattering of the mind never shuts off. How can we use your strategies to tackle this? Because I know that sleep, for instance, can be an issue for people where their brains just don't shut off, and also mood, things like that. What can you do?
Let's talk about the two separate issues there. Let's talk about the sleep first, because that affects a lot of people.
Yes.
I think, first of all, let me put the sleep aside and lay some groundwork here. I think what happens with a lot of people, like you say, we live in a society now where a lot of information is coming at us. Everybody's got all kinds of gadgets that they use. Our brain is now evolving to a new element. So what happens is, with all of that information that's coming to us, we haven't learned how to manage that information. Right. And so That's why my book coming out is called Help, My Thoughts Are Holding Me Hostage. That's also the
Right.
name of my radio show that I have
Yeah.
every week. But the point being is as our brains are evolving to a new element, getting into the sleep issue for sure here, when we see a lot of activity in the front part of the brain in what we call delta. So the
Yes.
brain's producing a lot of frequencies all the time. Delta, theta, alpha, beta, a lot of people have heard those, but they are faster in frequency. So for example, when delta is the dominant factor, that's when you're asleep.
Yeah.
So here you are trying to get to sleep and you have all this beta or delta activity in the front. That's when people's sleep is disrupted. Their
Yes.
brain, that monkey mind in the brain. So they have busy mind, tossing and turning. They can't shut some of that stuff off. So with the brain training or the neurofeedback that we use, we train the neurons to stop doing that and move towards normal, and then they sleep better, or they get rid of restless leg syndrome, stuff like that.
Is that a lengthy process of training, or is it something that you can do quite quickly?
The answer to that is yes.
Right.
Just what modality? It's kind of like, is it nature or is it nurture?
Yeah.
And scientifically, we know the answer to that is yes. It is both nature and nurture. So to answer specifically your question, how long does it take? If we're using neurofeedback only, then we find that it's usually a 4 to 5 month process. So when we're working with sleep issues or attention deficit disorder, anxiety, depression, so neurofeedback has been around basically since the 60s, in working with that. And now we're coming into an era of energy medicine integration. And so we're working a lot with stuff like that. Some of the research that we have been doing recently and seeing elements of the brain change very quickly. So meditation is another thing that people are able to change these elements of their brain. Give you an example of some of the things that we have done just in the way of research. We would find people. I had a person that we did an experiment with. She had a lot of that beta in the back of the brain, a lot of anxiety and stuff like that. And so we did a 30-day process with this person. Had her meditate for roughly 30 minutes a day. She would average that. Some days were longer meditations, some days were shorter. But as an average, 30 minutes every day for 30 days. And then we asked her to use what's called a focused intention. So she would, at some point in her meditation, well, let me back up a little bit. There is a process that Dr. Joe teaches about pulling energy up through the energy centers of the body, what we would call the chakras, if you will. But you pull this energy with this breathing technique up through your body and hold the energy there. And then the energy is able to do things in your body. So she would do maybe 5 or 6 of those breathing techniques before she started her meditation. Then at some point in her meditation, she would use the intention. She would visualize the red areas in the back of her brain. And we had her just give her brain very simple instructions. And that's the intention. I would prefer the red to be green. So it didn't say, okay, I want the nucleus accumbens to do this and go in through the chiasm. That it didn't have to do that. Very simple instruction. I prefer the red to be green. We brain mapped her in 30 days later, after she had done that for 30 days. And guess what? The red is green.
So you can measure
and
it.
her anxiety was reduced.
And do you? Sorry, guy. Just one quickie. Do you support your techniques with any nutritional or supplements?
Oh, absolutely. Nutrition is so vital in all of this, and so we're starting to see where people are enhancing their internal capabilities. Let me come back to that particular issue, but I need to lay some more groundwork.
Sure.
And guy looks like he's going to explode if we don't
Yeah.
let him ask a question yet.
Just
But
cut.
the only point I was going to raise was there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who
Yes.
might be suffering anxiety or monkey mind, can't switch off, and actually to get them sit down for even 5 minutes
Mm-hmm.
to just be still is a massive task because then the chat is
It
in
can
and
be.
the,
That's what I'm going to
right.
share with you, some other information. We just finished doing a 6-month long project with a group called Access Consciousness. And if people aren't familiar with that, go Google that and you'll see that for 20 plus years they've been out there working with people in order to do a process called the bars. Now, I had never heard of this process called the bars. Again, I was doing my thing at Greg Reed and Secret Knock, and when I showed up, and they are big fans of this, and so Greg's wife Alan said, "Oh, you're here. We got to connect you up with Gary and Dane, and you've got to do this brain map on the bars." And it's like, okay, all right, yeah, that's good, fine, I'll do it. And I'd never heard of that, and so we did the brain maps on a few people that were having their bars run, and then I was supposed to speak about it at 8 o'clock the next morning. Well, that's kind of a dangerous proposition, measuring something you've never measured before, and then you're going to get up on stage in front of 300 people and you're going to talk about it, when I've never heard of this thing. So by the time I got back to the hotel after dinner and stuff, it was kind of late, and I was tired, and I need my full brain faculties to do that. So we processed it, and by 3 in the morning, I'm looking at this stuff, and my jaw is just dropping. I'm going, whoa, brains of my world don't do this. There is something up here. So that's when I, measured it in a whole bunch of different ways, then got up and talked about it. And I was just so excited. There's a YouTube video of me out there talking about that. That's really amazing. And from that, we decided to do this full-blown study, at a very high level, and we've just gotten that. So this bars process, they use acupressure. So they put their fingers on head, and the acupressure causes the energy in the brain to begin to move and flow. So everybody has areas that get blocked, that the energy is not flowing, and that's what slows down some of this process. So now as we look at energy medicine and energy healing, and energy psychology, that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. So we found that people's energy aligned a great deal, and some of these elements that we would see in their brain maps would disappear like in an hour and a half.
Wow.
Now, explain that to me. Well, when you're talking about energy, that's what's going on in the brain. There's a graphic that I use in a lot of my lectures, and it's called the thalamic gate. At the top of the thalamus in the brain is a little almond-shaped thing down right in the center of the brain, and it regulates a lot of the frequencies that go on in our brain and our body. And at the top of the thalamus, there's a set of what's called reticular cells. These reticular cells, a function of that is to allow cells to bind to the top of like the thalamus, so that other cells can then, like axonal columnar cells, can develop out of that through the cortex up through from the subcortex into the thinking part of the brain. And it comes out right here, the top center of the head, which is basically the crown chakra. So what tends to happen here is that we look at energy in the field, in the morphogenetic field, the collective unconscious, whatever you want to call it. We call that oscillation. So that energy is vibrating. We live in a vibrational universe, and we are vibrational beings. So this energy then comes down through the crown chakra, through the thalamic gate, gets into the thalamus, and then it begins to resonate. That's the energy in the cells of our body. So there's communication that goes on. And so when people have energy that is not flowing or that is blocked, that's where we find that disease occurs. All disease is nothing more than dysregulated energy. When you align the energy and the brain knows how to regulate itself, then you get that regulation flowing. Then these conditions that we see you know, why is it that people that come to these events, one guy had a brain tumor, and he'd been to two events, and then he went to have his brain scanned again at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston.
Yeah.
And when they came back in to give him the results, they said, we can find no trace of the tumor.
That's
And
incredible.
they said, come back in a couple more intervals, and they still couldn't find it. And why people get rid of the effects of Parkinson's disease, we've seen brain elements change to help brain injury. You know, I work with professional athletes that have, football players in particular, that have brain injuries. And we're seeing some amazing changes in that. So we're moving into a new era where it's going to change the way we understand healing in the world.
I just had a thought that occurred to me when you were speaking about the energy and how it moves from the top of the head all the way, you know, down to the different states of the body. Can we disrupt that energy flow with modern day devices? For instance,
yes, actually, that does happen. I was doing some work with a physicist, Yuri Krohn, and we were looking at cell phone emissions.
Yes.
You know, because the interesting thing about the cell phone industry is you have usually 3 or 4 transmitters in the phone, and they only have to report the lowest emission from any 4 of those, so the other 3 could be very high.
Yes.
And he has developed a process where he can infuse subtle energy into like a sticker.
Yeah.
And we measure this subtle energy in a lot of different components. And when you look at subtle energy, and what is subtle energy? It is the energy that is really, that commands the universe. When you see these pictures of a galaxy, and the galaxy is spinning, what makes the galaxy move? It's subtle energy. The universe is made up of total subtle energy.
Right.
So one little demonstration that I do all the time is, and it's sitting on the corner of my desk, is a Tesla globe, you know, where you put your fingers on that and you get all these sparks that are going on in there. If I take a CFL light bulb and I hold it away from the globe where the energy is, that light bulb will light up. What causes that to light up? It is subtle energy. And so we are part of that energy field. You and I are connected through quantum entanglement. We are part of each other. And so it's that, you know, I've always wondered how, you know, when you watch like a flock of birds or a school of fish, and they're all going along, and all of a sudden they change direction. How do they do that? You know, is it like the lead fish goes, "I'm turning left now," and
that's right.
Off you go. No, it is the vibration in the field. Now, let me add something to that, and that is, how do we create our own reality? Because that's all part of this. Again, in a lot of my lectures, I talk about your thoughts. If you have a thought, whether it's a wanted thought or an unwanted thought, it doesn't matter. The principle is the same. If you have a thought and you hold that thought for 17 seconds, and that thought has a vibration energy to it, the law of attraction says that other energy that is like that will be attracted to it. So thoughts begin to come in. So if I'm having a negative thought, an unwanted thought, and I keep thinking about it, that's I'll give you an illustration here in a second, but if you hold that for 17 seconds, 17 more seconds, 17, you get to 68 seconds. It now has amassed enough energy through a principle that's called constructive interference, that amassed enough energy that it can now affect particle matter. That is how we create our own reality. So whatever your intention, whatever you're putting out there, you know, let's say, for example, I'm driving down the highway, and I'm in this energy field of content and happiness and, you know, love and joy and feeling good, and some knucklehead cuts me off. Now I'm vibrating angry energy, and I've dropped down here. So if I'm holding that energy for 68 seconds, and I go back to the office, and I'm telling the people here, you know, this guy cut me off, and I got so angry. Well, he doesn't even belong on the road. Now I've held it for several hours, and I go home, and my wife's fixing dinner, and she says, can you go to the store and pick up a few items for me? And it's like, yeah, okay. It gives me more time to think about this knucklehead. So I go to the store, get 3 items, and I pick up the 3 items and go up to the register. Now I've been doing this, vibrating this for several hours. And I get up to the cash register, and there's a guy in front of me in the express line that has 38 items, right?
Yeah.
Coincidence? Not hardly.
Yeah.
That's the energy that I have attracted to myself, and I start attracting, and we start living these patterns over and over again, depending on what we think about. If we just understand the principle, if I start changing my thought patterns, I will change what happens to me. You talk people who maybe have an intention, they want more money. And so they're thinking consciously, I want more money, I want more money, I want more money. They're putting that in the field. And maybe they have a subconscious belief that says, you don't deserve more money. That's what's actually being broadcast in the field. And their energy is not lined up, so they're not attracting the things that they actually desire. And then there are those people who can line that up. And it's like, wow, their life is magic. And it's because they have learned how to manage this energy, not only physiologically in their body, but through the thought processes and how to interact with the universal field. Does that make sense to you?
It does. That's like the scientific version of
if I was,
what you want. Go on, Stu.
If I was to sum that up, would it be we really should try and think happy thoughts?
Well, that in a perfect world, that would be great, but that's not what really happens. 75% of our thoughts are negative. I don't know if you knew that or not, but
we've got a question right here because I read some of that. We have over 50,000 thoughts a day.
Well, it's actually higher than that. It's more like 600,000. It's more like what you have that you're consciously aware of.
Wow. And then the majority are repetitive and negative.
Yeah, and they're playing all the time, and they're in your subconscious. So how do those get there? A belief is nothing more than a thought that you have over and over again. And so as you keep having those thoughts, that becomes ingrained or implanted in your subconscious. And those are the things, if you want to know what's on your subconscious mind, look at your behavior. And so if it's like, whoa, I have this behavior I don't like, well, that's probably what your subconscious is about. Now, we have a device. Oh, I sent it to the other room. But it's a headband that when you put it on, it has 4 electrodes, 2 in the front and then 2 behind your ears. And all you have to do is think about something, and it will let you know what your subconscious perception of that is, and also what your emotions are, whether you have positive or negative emotion. We use this a lot with a program that we're doing with Midwestern University, Medical University, and working with veterans that have PTSD and traumatic brain injury, also first responders and professional athletes that have injury, so that we can help them see what that is. And you can literally use this to help train your brain. So are you familiar with mind movies? Have you ever heard of mind movies?
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So Natalie Ledwell is one of the founders of mind movies, and it's like vision boards on steroids. So when we set somebody up with one of these, we also set them up with a subscription to the mind movies. So you can have your own pictures, sayings, your own video, and create a mind movie so that, like when I meditate, I will watch my mind movie before I go into meditation and then after I come out. We've got some scientific brain maps of people. One of the first times that we encountered this, we do like some of the people we measure at Dr. Joe's events. We'll do pre and post. So before the event begins, and then we measure them again afterwards and look at the changes in their brain. So we're doing one of these pre and post readings with this gal, and I'm seeing, the EEG going all over the place. It's like, uh-oh, what's wrong with that? Must be a bad electrode or what. So I'm fiddling with stuff. And then afterwards, I got her out in the outside the room there, and asked her, I said, tell me about what was happening there. And she says, oh, I was just thinking about my mind movie. She wasn't actually watching it. She was thinking about it. And it was so real to her. She was having that experience while we were mapping her brain. And now we have literally thousands of those where we have measured people going through that process. And so there's a great deal of power and energy in the brain that happens when you are focusing on this. So if a person wants to begin to train their brain, that's why we now have these tools. Another one that we're working on is this guy right here. It's a 16 channel that will allow people to do brain mapping and brain training from their smartphone, their tablet, or their computer anywhere in the world.
If I wanted to do that at home, and let's just say I ordered a rogue kit off the internet, could I potentially do more harm than good?
Well, yeah.
I'm just thinking, I'm sitting there and I'm putting this thing on, and all of a sudden I've wet my pants. I don't know why.
Or you start quacking like a duck.
Exactly.
That could be a little unnerving.
Yes.
So anything that you can train, you can untrain, and that's what we call neuroplasticity in the brain.
Yes.
So, like with the training that we teach the brain, I mean, you can train yourself with bad habits. You know anybody that has bad habits? Yeah, we all know people like that. How did they get the bad habits? They train themselves. Can they train themselves out of a bad habit? Yeah. I don't know that you would get to the point of putting one of these on and wetting your pants. Here's kind of what happens when we're working with that. We create what's called a protocol, or a set of instructions of what we want the brain to do. Maybe this is improving memory or improving your sleep or something like that. So there's a set of instructions that we create for the brain. When you put one of these devices on and then you select the brain training side of the application, it's then going to go into a learning mode. So you select learning mode and imagine that there is a cube kind of in a tunnel, and it's suspended in space.
Yeah.
And what you want that cube to do is you want it to rotate counterclockwise. Okay. That's the event that we want to have happen. So you put it in learning mode, and you're thinking about rotate counterclockwise, and then you set up a neutral where it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
So then you go into it. It takes about 8 seconds for your brain to learn that. Right. So it records the brain patterns of what you're doing. And then when you select the training mode and you start thinking about, I want that cube to rotate, so you're focusing on the cube, and all of a sudden it'll start to rotate counterclockwise.
Right.
And then you can control it, go neutral, and it'll stop. Now I want it to rotate the other way, or I want it to go in and out of the tunnel, or I want it to disappear. You can create all of those conditions. We have the ability now to measure things in the brain and put them into a practical application.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we are in the technological field of learning how to train our brains, where you can begin to understand what are some of the subconscious patterns that I'm feeding my brain. How can I train it to do higher and better things? How can I create a better reality for myself? How can I sleep better? How can, so going back to your question about nutrition,
yes.
If you're feeding your body really crappy stuff, guess what you're going to get? A bunch of blockages, and it's going to cause the cells to react in a certain way. So eating healthy, having good supplements, there is good food, and then there's not so good food. We know that there's a lot, you don't want to live on a diet of, pardon the commercial here, you don't want to live on a diet of Twinkies. Probably not going to help you. You need a little more protein than just those carbs there, or the sugar. So having that balanced nutrition is going to make a big difference. Much of what we were taught about nutrition, when I was growing up, the pyramid, with the 4 food groups and all of that, we didn't know any better,
Yeah.
And so
no, we didn't. We like to use the power of our brain in this company, at least, and we turn that pyramid by just sheer thought upside down. So all the
Exactly.
good stuff's at the top, and all the bad stuff's
Yep.
at the bottom. Just thinking about if I'm at home right now, so we've got our listeners out there, and they just want to be the best person of themselves, so the best version of themselves, should I say? And I've listened to what you said about the subconscious mind. And the ability that we can have to change these thoughts and try and become happier. What can I do at home, almost like, a hack or practical tools that I can apply perhaps every day without having access to, machinery, services and the like? Is there anything that I can do? You touched on meditation before.
Meditation is one of the best things that you can do.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways to meditate out there. Some may get you a little further along.
Yes.
I think, since we worked with thousands of advanced meditators over the last 3 years, we're beginning to understand more about that. There's a process called mindfulness.
Yeah.
And there's some books out there, about mindfulness. And if you can start to live present in the moment, that's one of the best things that you can do. And also be aware of your thoughts.
Right.
Am I getting caught up in these thought loops?
Yeah.
Or can I break that pattern and say, no, I don't want to be thinking about that because I know what the effect of that is going to have. So I'm going to, think more about. And let me give you some additional information here. We talked earlier about the negative thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's important that people understand that the contrast in the world is very important. The yin and the yang kind of thing.
Yes.
So when we have negative thoughts, that's really helping us because we understand what it is we don't want, which then allows us to put our emphasis or our focus on what we do want. But you got to have the contrast, in order to do that. So the contrast gives us focus. And if people understand that basic principle, then when you start having these thoughts about what you don't want in your life, then step back and say, okay, if that's what I don't want, then what is it I do want? Oh, this is what I do want. And then you start putting that energy into that, and that's what's going to begin to materialize in your world. You don't need a gadget to do that.
Yeah. But nearly every person I speak to, though, Jeff, and if meditation comes up in a topic, nearly every person I speak to, or pretty much ever, struggles with it.
They don't know how to meditate.
They don't know, and to sit down for even, like I said, 5 minutes. What would your tip be for that? Even just to go, right, this is what you need to do for 5 minutes a day to start, or whatever.
It's like training a dog. So you want the dog to sit and stay. So in the very first part, you have to teach the dog to sit, right? Put your butt down on the floor here. And then it's like, stay. And then you walk a little ways away, sit, stay, and then after doing that again and again and again and again, the dog finally gets the idea of sit and stay. Your brain is no different than that. So you get into a meditation and you get all of this stuff going on, and it's like teaching your brain, sit, stay. No, we don't do that. Quiet. And if you could only hold it for 5 seconds, great. Then next time hold it for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute. And that's how people build up their ability, and at the same time trying to understand, okay, that busyness in my brain, all of that information that's going on, I want that to be quiet. Give your brain simple instructions. I would prefer when I'm in this meditation, so you're getting down and you're actually cycling between theta and alpha. Theta is a very creative state. Alpha is what we call sensorial rest, where you are alert, but you are aware of what's going on. So we teach people how to cycle between theta and alpha. And as they do that over and over and over again, new dendrites form, new pathways develop, and that's then what fires. So people can do that at home if they're willing to put in the work.
Okay.
So people say, well, I just can't do it. Well, you got, decades of your brain running wild, so wild dog, horse, wild brain, same thing.
Is there an
Yeah.
optimum time to do it?
With yourself. I'm sorry?
Is there an optimum time to do it? Like get up first thing in the morning, or it doesn't matter what time if you want to just sit?
Doesn't matter. You can do it multiple times a day in the morning. I prefer to do mine in the morning,
Mm.
because I'm better. When I get 9, 10 o'clock at night, I'm like a NiCad battery. I just kind of, I'm asleep,
Done. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm done. But, I usually will get up, 3:34 in the morning and meditate for 2 hours. I never could do that before.
Oh,
My
wow.
brain, talking about all this beta in the back of the brain, my brain was like that. I didn't even know what quiet was
Yeah.
until I trained that out of my brain. And now, I have the ability to be quiet for long periods of time and be able to experience the value of connecting with the universe to find out what I want to find out.
And you mentioned, you touched before on supplementation to help your brain state. What would you recommend any particular supplementation?
There's the two key factors that will help are melatonin and serotonin.
Yes.
So you take a little bit of melatonin at night, that can help. And the one thing that I think messes people up when they're dealing with that is they think more is better. So it's like, well, I'm not getting the effect I want. 3 milligrams is about, the max you want to take. Less is better. So
Right.
if you're still awake after, 30 minutes, you're not getting drowsy,
Yeah.
then take a little bit less, take half of that, and that will help. Serotonin should be taken in the day. That's what's going to help you perform better as you go along.
Right.
You want antioxidants, fish oil and stuff like that.
Yep.
Paying attention to what your body needs. Now, some people really should go to their physician and have their blood drawn and see if they have any deficiency in zinc or, some of the minerals, because, this is about bringing your body and your nutrition into alignment so that that's the way you live every day, and staying in
Absolutely.
balance. This is all about staying in balance, about not only the energy in your body, but, help the cells of your body, by eating right and exercising. And it doesn't take a lot,
That's right. And I guess if you're talking about drawing blood as well and looking for deficiencies, it might be worthy to run a hormone panel on your blood as well, because your hormones are going
Absolutely,
to
yeah.
huge
Because
impact.
you can have all kinds of things that are out of balance.
Yeah.
And so if people recognize the key here is to get both my body, my brain aligned with energy so that I can interact with the energy field around me. Everybody has the ability for intuition.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we see in the brain mapping, people who are highly intuitive because they do exactly that. They care about their nutrition, they care about their bodies, they do what they need to do to sleep well, to meditate, to stay in balance. They know when they're out of balance, what to do to get back in balance, how to get grounded.
Yes.
There's all of those kinds of things.
Got it. And do you what strategies do you personally implement yourself to stay on top of brain health?
Well, I eat a lot of Twinkies and chocolate.
Perfect. We'll stop there.
No, actually, I listen to my body,
Right.
and it will tell me what it is that I need, and so a lot of it is just some education, just basic education of nutrition and things like that. Now, I'm getting older. I just turned 65 this year, and so testosterone tends to be an element. So I take a supplement that I get at Costco, that deals with testosterone supplementation. So I'm not dragging myself around all day feeling tired and lethargic.
Right.
That really helps, and it also has a lot of the B vitamins, B6, B12, be healthy. That's in there as well. So
Okay. Excellent.
those kinds of things are are really helpful. And at different stages of life, you might need different things or different conditions depending on how far out of balance you are. But I'm not on any kind of medication. The only thing I take are these supplements, and they work well for me. Other supplements people might need, but it's about being aware. If you're not aware of those things, go to a naturopath and have him give you some instruction on it.
Yeah, great.
Excellent.
Do you ever get stressed these days, Jeff?
Oh, everybody gets stressed, and it's not a question of whether you're going to get stressed or not. It's a question of what do you do about it when it does happen.
Yes.
And what happens in your brain is when you get into a stressful mode, your brain starts to produce more cortisol, and then your memory, you think your memory is going and stuff like that. And it's all, again, it's when I experience stress, it's usually because I'm not grounded. So I know the process I need to do, and I can do it within a matter of 3 or 4 minutes, go through this process, get grounded, and then I can get back. Some people don't believe in this, but I do, because I experience it quite a lot with people that I work with, that there are what I call energy vampires out there. So if my energy is up here and the vibration of that energy is love, contentment, joy, bliss, all of that, and that's kind of where I live in that range, there are people who come in that are down here in the worry, anger, fear stuff, and they like to draw off that energy of people who are in that higher energy level.
So they complain all the time.
If you're around that for a while, you feel kind of depleted, or that person leaves and you go, wow, they just sucked the life right out of me. Well, yeah, exactly. And so you have to know how to get, when that's beginning to happen to you, how to get grounded, how to pull the energy in, how to coalesce the energy, not only from outside of us in the field, but pull it up through the body. And you can do that in a matter of a few minutes, and you're right back on and you're charged.
Got it. Yeah.
And we've spoken a lot about nutrition and strategies to improve the mindset. What about exercise? Because I have heard that exercise can be perhaps one of the greatest strategies when tackling depression, for instance.
Oh, yeah. When you do that, talking specifically about depression, very often in the front of the brain we'll see a lot of alpha. And that's what we call familial depression. So when you're walking, and that causes the endorphins to kick in, and up here in the left front part of the brain, that's where our pleasure centers are. So even just walking, exercising, walking on a treadmill, whatever it is, it will get the endorphins afire, and you'll start to feel good.
Right. So really get moving.
Yeah, get moving, get out there, it affects, the muscles get stronger, you're able to, that is very, very important. So again, we're talking about balance. I mean, you can over-exercise. For me to go out and train like some of the professional athletes that we work with, that's not a good idea for me. For them, that works great because their body is in it's a fine-tuned mechanism, and just the littlest changes in their exercise can have big consequences in their performance and their ability. For me, if I don't do anything, well, I'm just asking for trouble, because the energy is not going to get regulated. I'm not going to get that flow of energy in my body. And so it's knowing really what exercise is going to do good for you and what you're going to be good at, what you enjoy. I love to play racquetball. I don't do much of that anymore. Just because I don't have time. It's not because I don't love it, but I'm, very busy in the things that we do. But I can get out and walk, and so I do that.
Perfect. Excellent.
Yeah. Wow. I guess the take-home message for today's podcast is listening to your inner self, isn't it? And creating balance within the body to have that harmony and not be influenced by external factors.
And start small as well. If, many of us have, we've got busy lives, we've got busy minds as a consequence of that. But if, like you said, we can just take perhaps just 5 minutes out of our day just to try and quieten down the monkey in the mind, spend a little
Yeah,
bit of time, work on ourselves.
I like the dog analogy. That's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
lot of it is get some education, find out what this
Yes.
is. If you
Yeah.
want to know how to do that, start with mindfulness.
Right.
Watch some of the videos that are out there, get some books, there are plenty of them, to know how to be present in the moment when you're washing dishes
Yeah.
or when you're, at work, whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
And that will make a huge difference in helping train your mind day after day. It's like you can't go do one push-up and say, okay, well, I'm fit now, I don't have to do that again.
That's right. Yeah.
It's got to become a lifestyle. It's got to be,
Yes.
how much do you want to be in balance, or do you
Yeah.
like, letting your brain run you instead of you running your
Brilliant.
brain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You create the reality that you want. So if you don't like your life, then my advice is, look at what you're doing and how you're doing it, because you're the one that's creating it. The only person that's responsible for the life that you don't like is you.
Yeah. There you go. That'd be hard to hear for a lot of people, I reckon.
It is.
Yeah.
It was hard
Wise
for me
words.
to learn that concept and then say, whoa, I'm the one responsible for that. No, no way. This has happened. Those people think that life is happening to them rather than them creating it. We are creators. We are here to create, to learn how to create. And when you begin to understand all of the universal laws and components that go along with that we've talked about in this podcast,
Yeah.
then you start to change your reality, and life starts to get better. Things start showing up. I love to play this game with the universe when I go out somewhere, and if my energy is aligned, I'll want that parking space. So just as I'm pulling in, somebody's pulling out, or the space closest to the door is empty. You probably all had that kind of experience, and so what if you could do that with intention? What if you could do that all the time? What if you could create all of the things that you want to attract, whether it's the love of your life or you want to attract more things? This is about learning how to command the laws of the universe. If that's what you want to do, then that's why you're here.
Fantastic. I love the parking spot too. I often try that, and it does
Yeah.
work.
You've got a motorbike, guy.
Yeah.
It's easier for you. You may think that you're commanding this parking spot, but there are just more little spots that bikes can squeeze into.
It's rockstar parking.
You're
No
cheating
Yeah.
yourself.
But I'm fully aware of the time, Jeff. So we come into the end of the show, but we ask a question with every guest, and that is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
The best piece of advice that I was ever given was, I kind of had a mindset, a thought of the way that I was raised and the way a lot of people are raised is, you got to do more. So I would take my boat down to the stream, not literally, this is figuratively,
Yeah.
and put it in there and start paddling upstream, thinking harder and faster was the way to get where I wanted to go. When really the best advice that I got was just stop paddling. Go with the flow. So if I don't have to turn my boat around, it will turn itself around. And then I start going with the flow of the energy. And that was the best advice that I ever received, and really started me thinking about how I'm living my life.
Fantastic.
I like it. Makes sense. Go with the flow.
Go with the flow.
Yeah, the struggle's not there. And for anyone listening to this, and they want to find out more about what you do, Jeff, where would be the best place to go?
Well, website, we have a lot of information there, thoughtgenius.com. So that's a good place. I have a book coming out real soon, Help, My Thoughts Are Holding Me Hostage. You can go to the Voice America channel. I'm on the Empowerment channel on voiceamerica.com. And my radio show is the same name. There's a bunch of this kind of information shows out there. It's free. All you have to do is log on there. You get an app from the App Store for Voice America, and listen. They have a bunch of channels on wellness and health and finance, and I just happen to be on the Empowerment channel with Help, My Thoughts Are Holding Me Hostage.
Fantastic.
Right.
And we'll link to all the show notes anyway when we push this out in the new year. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm definitely going to re-listen to this and take that information.
Thanks for having me on. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate it. So
No problems. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll connect with you in the future.
oh, absolutely. Happy to do this anytime with you guys. You're fun.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Brilliant.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.